And now I would like to move to the presentation from CNSC staff as outlined in CMD 15H8 and H8.A. I understand that Mr. Auden will make the presentation. Over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. President and members of the Commission. My name is Barclay Howden. I'm the Director General of the Directorate of Power Reactor Regulation at the CNSC. With me today are Mr. Francois Rinfray, Director of the Darlington Regulatory Program Division, and Mr. Ross Richardson, Senior Regulatory Program Officer of the same division, as well as CNSC inspectors and staff who are available to answer any questions the Commission may have. This CNSC staff presentation will discuss Ontario Power Generation's application to renew its power reactor operating license for the Darlington Nuclear Generating Station to authorize refurbishment and continued operations. We will begin today's presentation by providing an overview of the Darlington station and the license application, followed by information on the Darlington refurbishment and life extension project. The presentation will then focus on current operations at Darlington, including CNSC staff's regulatory oversight and assessment of OPG's performance. The proposed license and license conditions handbook will also be discussed, followed by CNSC staff conclusions and recommendations to the Commission on license renewal. I will now pass the presentation over to Mr. Francois Rinfray, who will provide an overview of the Darlington station and the license application.
Thank you, Mr. Howden. Mr. President and members of the Commission, my name is Francois Rinfray, Director of the Darlington Regulatory Program Division. The Darlington station is owned and operated by the licensee, Ontario Power Generation, a Canadian corporation whose head office is in Toronto, Ontario. The station is located on the north shore of Lake Ontario in the municipality of Clarington and regional municipality of Durham in the province of Ontario. As you've heard, OPG is proceeding with detailed planning for the midlife refurbishment of the 4 Darlington reactors to extend the station life for an additional 30 years. The Darlington station consists of 4 881 megawatt CANDU reactors, which came into service between 1990 and 1993. The Darlington site is also home to a tritium removal facility, which is designed to reduce levels of tritium from the heavy water systems at Darlington and other CANDU reactors. The current Darlington operating license expires on December 31st, 2015. OPG's license application was submitted in December 2013, and an addendum to the application was submitted in January 2015, which focused on station performance data and provided an update since the original license application was submitted. The license application requests the Commission renew the operating license for 13 years to cover life extension activities, including refurbishment of the 4 Darlington reactors. As shown on this slide, OPG began feasibility studies for Darlington refurbishment, including commencement of the integrated safety review back in 2008. Since that time, the CNSC issued an environmental assessment scoping information document, as well as an environmental assessment screening report for the proposed refurbishment and life extension project under the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act. In 2012, a public hearing was held to consider the environmental assessment screening report and the renewal of the operating license for a period of 22 months. In 2013, the Commission reached a decision on the environmental assessment and concluded that the proposed project is not likely to cause significant adverse environmental effects, taking into account mitigation measures identified by the Environmental Assessment Screening Report. The Commission also renewed the operating license to allow OPG sufficient time to complete the necessary studies for the proposed refurbishment outages. With an EA decision reached and the necessary studies for the proposed refurbishment outages complete, the Commission can now consider OPG's license application under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act to authorize refurbishment and continued operations. I will now pass the presentation over to Mr. Ross Richardson, who will discuss in further detail the regulatory aspects of the Darlington refurbishment and life extension project.
Thank you, Mr. Infra. Mr. President, members of the Commission, my name is Ross Richardson. I'm a Senior Regulatory Program Officer in the Darlington Regulatory Program Division. The CNSC's regulatory expectations for proposed projects to refurbish and extend the life of a nuclear power plant are contained in CNSC Regulatory Document RD360, Life Extension of Nuclear Power Plants. As described in RD360, once a licensee decides to undertake a life extension project, the licensee systematically identifies and addresses all environmental and safety regulatory aspects and integrates them into an integrated implementation plan. To do this, the licensee, 1, participates in the environmental assessment process, 2, carries out an integrated safety review, and 3, incorporates the results of these assessments into a global assessment report and integrated implementation plan. RD360 also provides regulatory expectations for refurbishment project execution and returning the reactor back to commercial operation post-refurbishment. As previously mentioned, an environmental assessment was completed and was subject to a separate public hearing in 2012. Further information on the integrated safety review, global assessment report, and integrated implementation plan are discussed on the following slides. An integrated safety review, or ISR, involves an assessment of the current plant and plant performance to determine the extent to which the plant conforms to modern codes, standards, and best practices, and to identify any factors that would limit safe long-term operation. This enables a determination of reasonable and practical modifications that should be made to the plant or programs to enhance the safety of the facility to a level approaching that of a new nuclear power plant and to allow for safe long-term operation. OPG's ISR for Darlington refurbishment and life extension was completed over a 3-year period and submitted to CNSC staff in October 2011. The ISR was carried out in accordance with OPG's ISR basis document, which was submitted to and accepted by CNSC staff as the methodology for performing the ISR. The ISR addressed all IAEA safety factors and CNSC safety and control areas and demonstrated a high level of compliance with modern codes, standards, and practices. In 2014, OPG submitted an ISR Emerging Issues Review, which addressed ISR basis codes, standards, and practices that were updated since the original ISR assessment. The ISR identified safety improvements to continue to enhance the current strong performance at Darlington over the proposed extended plant life. CNSC staff conducted an extensive review of the ISR over a 2-year period and concluded that the ISR meets CNSC regulatory expectations. OPG submitted its global assessment report to CNSC staff in December 2013 and made the document publicly available on OPG's external website. The global assessment report presents the results of the environmental assessment and integrated safety review in an integrated manner and provides an overall risk judgment on acceptability of continued operations for the proposed extended plant life. The global assessment report confirms the conclusions of the environmental assessment and integrated safety review and provides additional detail regarding the positive basis for life extension and continued operations. The global assessment report concludes that the current plant, with planned safety improvements, including refurbishment, will meet, to the extent practicable, the regulatory design requirements of a new nuclear power plant. CNSC staff's review concluded that the global assessment report and supporting documents meet CNSC regulatory expectations. OPG submitted its Integrated Implementation Plan, or IIP, to CNSC staff in December 2013 and made the document publicly available on OPG's external website. The IIP presents proposed environmental and safety improvements resulting from the environmental assessment and integrated safety review and includes timeframes for implementation. OPG has incorporated the feedback received from CNSC staff on the IIP, and as a result, CNSC staff conclude that the IIP meets regulatory expectations. The IIP is presented in Addendum F of CMD 15-H8. Some of the major activities identified in the IIP include the replacement of pressure tubes, calandria tubes, feeders, and end fittings, installation of new auxiliary shutdown cooling pumps, which are physically separate and of diverse design than the existing shutdown cooling pumps, installation of a containment filtered venting system to provide filtered emergency venting of containment to ensure containment integrity in the highly unlikely event of a severe beyond design basis accident, provision of shield tank overpressure protection to enhance the relief capacity of the shield tank surrounding each unit's calandria vessel to prevent shield tank failure in the highly unlikely event of a severe beyond design basis accident, and enhancements to the powerhouse steam venting system to improve reliability to protect plant systems by venting steam in the unlikely event of a main steam line break in the powerhouse. Continuing from the previous slide, other major IIP activities include the installation of a third emergency power generator to increase defense and depth of the emergency power reliability if any one emergency power generator is not available, provision of an alternate and independent source of emergency water supply to the heat transport system, implementation of safety-related recommendations from component condition assessments conducted as part of the integrated safety review, and implementation of environmental assessment mitigation and follow-up activities. In preparation for refurbishment, OPG has established a dedicated refurbishment organization that is responsible for the planning, implementation, and assurance of the refurbishment project. OPG is using engineer, procure, construct, or EPC contractors to perform the majority of refurbishment work. OPG is overseeing the activities of the EPC contractors, including review and acceptance of plans and deliverables, and surveillance and witnessing of activities. OPG has informed CNSC staff as part of initial planning. OPG benchmarked its program with other refurbishment projects, including the refurbishments at Bruce Power and Point Lepreau. As noted previously, in preparation for refurbishment, OPG has constructed a full-scale replica of a Darlington reactor. The replica is being used to train staff prior to performing work in the field and will also be used to develop work plans and test and commission specialized tooling required for refurbishment work. This slide provides a high-level timeline for life extension activities as proposed by OPG in its license application. As shown, OPG is planning on staggering the proposed refurbishment outages, with Unit 2 being refurbished first starting in October 2016, followed by Unit 3 in 2019, Unit 1 in 2021, and Unit 4 in 2022. The replacement of pressure tubes, calandria tubes, end fittings, and feeders is the primary refurbishment work. Other IIP actions will be completed either at power or during other planned maintenance outages. OPG commits to perform the safety improvements with the highest safety benefit as early as possible and no later than the next planned maintenance outage following the unit's refurbishment outage. This plan takes the completion of all IIP activities for all units out to 2028 and forms the basis for OPG's request for a 13-year license. The management of refurbishment waste has been safely carried out for previous refurbishment projects, including the refurbishments at Bruce Power and Point Lepreau. OPG has considered the lessons learned from these projects to the management of refurbishment waste for Darlington. For example, volume reduction activities will be performed outside of the reactor vault, and a dedicated team will take ownership of the waste management program. During refurbishment, retube waste will be removed from the reactors, placed in shielded flasks, and transferred to a new dedicated retube waste processing building located on site within the protected area. The waste will then be segregated, volume reduced, and packaged into shielded containers. The containers will then be transferred and stored at a new dedicated retube waste storage building located on OPG property adjacent to the Darlington Waste Management Facility. The retube waste storage building is licensed separately under the Waste Facility Operating License. Return to service involves returning the reactor back to commercial operation post-refurbishment and includes demonstration that the associated work meets specified requirements and management arrangements have been updated appropriately. Similar to the Bruce Power and Point Lepreau refurbishment projects, CNSC staff have identified regulatory hold points for the return to service of each unit undergoing refurbishment as noted on this slide. These hold points would serve as regulatory verification to ensure prerequisite commitments have been met for staged increases in reactor power. Prerequisite commitments for each regulatory hold point are included in the draft License Conditions Handbook. The CNSC staff are recommending that approval to remove regulatory hold points be delegated to the Executive Vice President and Chief Regulatory Operations Officer. For reference, similar delegation of authority was previously granted for the Bruce Power and Point Lepreau refurbishment projects. I will now turn our attention to CNSC staff's performance assessment of the current operations of the Darlington Station. The CNSC has a clear and robust regulatory framework in place to ensure the continued safe operation of nuclear facilities. Regulatory oversight is provided to ensure licensees operate the nuclear facility in a safe manner in compliance with the requirements of the Nuclear Safety and Control Act and its regulations, as well as the Commission-approved license conditions. Regular inspections and evaluations verify that licensees are complying with the laws and regulations, as well as the conditions of their license. In this way, the CNSC can assure licensees are operating safely and adhering to regulatory requirements. Licensees are required to notify the CNSC of situations of high safety significance and submit routine scheduled reports on a quarterly basis or annual basis to the CNSC on various topics. CNSC staff report annually to the Commission on licensees' performance in the Regulatory Oversight Report for Canadian nuclear power plants. The 2014 report will be presented to the Commission at tomorrow's Commission meeting. As shown on this slide, compliance activities conducted by CNSC staff include inspections, event reviews, and other compliance activities, such as station walkdowns and desktop reviews of OPG submitted documents and reports. These activities represent over 23,000 person-days of effort by CNSC staff over 7 years, from 2008 to 2014. CNSC staff conclude that for the vast majority of these inspections, there are no significant findings, and OPG continues to be in compliance with CNSC regulatory requirements. As required during the course of compliance activities, CNSC staff raise action items to track the resolution of issues, and OPG has responded to the satisfaction of CNSC staff on all issues raised. This slide presents CNSC's plant safety performance ratings for the Darlington Station from 2008 to 2014. As shown, Darlington has received a fully satisfactory integrated plant rating, the highest rating possible, each year for the past 7 years. In summary, Safety performance at Darlington has remained satisfactory or fully satisfactory in all safety and control areas. As mentioned, Darlington has received a fully satisfactory integrated plant rating each year for the past 7 years. No worker or member of the public received a dose in excess of the regulatory dose limits, and all radiological releases were well below regulatory limits. OPG's programs are implemented and maintained effectively in accordance with regulatory requirements. Operating performance has been fully satisfactory over the past 7 years, and OPG continues to make safety enhancements and improvements to the station. In summary, OPG continues to make adequate provision for the protection of the environment, workers, and the public. As shown here, CNSC staff have identified regulatory focus areas that may be of particular interest to stakeholders, the public, and the Commission in regards to this Darlington license renewal. These regulatory focus areas are described in more detail on the following slides. Probabilistic safety assessments, or PSAs, are one of the various methods used to improve the robustness of plant designs, safe operation, and to demonstrate that multiple defense provisions are in place. PSA is used in a complementary manner to the traditional deterministic safety analysis and defense in-depth considerations. In 2011, OPG submitted a detailed and comprehensive probabilistic safety assessment for Darlington. CNSC staff completed an in-depth review of the PSA and confirmed that the submitted PSA followed the accepted methodologies and that Darlington is compliant with CNSC regulatory requirements. In 2015, OPG submitted an updated PSA, which includes recent design modifications, station operating experience, and feedback from CNSC staff's review of the 2011 PSA. The updated PSA includes credit for emergency mitigating equipment and the safety improvement opportunities committed to as part of the environmental assessment. The PSA results show that safety goal limits are met for each hazard and for the aggregation of all hazards by simple addition. OPG has committed to develop a whole site PSA pilot for the Pickering Nuclear Generating Station, and the lessons learned from the pilot will be considered for Darlington. With regards to fitness for service of pressure tubes, the current Darlington operating license requires Commission approval to operate beyond 210,000 equivalent full power hours, or EFPH, which was a design assumption of the pressure tube service life at the time of construction. This slide shows the projected EFPH values at planned refurbishment outages for each Darlington unit. As shown, Units 2 and 3 will be refurbished prior to reaching 210,000 EFPH, while Units 1 and 4 are expected to exceed this limit prior to their planned refurbishment outage. To demonstrate margin on the projected EFPH values at scheduled refurbishment outages, the pressure tube service life for Darlington is planned for 235,000 EFPH. CNSC staff have verified that OPG has established programs in place to monitor the fitness for service of pressure tubes to support the continued safe operation for the pre-refurbishment service life to 235,000 EFPH. Operating beyond this point is not a cliff edge effect, but is an indicator of when further assessment will be necessary. And given OPG's plans to refurbish the Darlington reactors, further assessments to demonstrate operating beyond this point is not required. In the meantime, pressure tubes are continually monitored and continued fitness for service must be demonstrated. CNSC staff recommend that the Commission authorize OPG to operate the Darlington units up to 235,000 equivalent full power hours. With regards to nuclear emergency management, OPG has enhanced its emergency response capabilities to respond to a highly unlikely event, a highly unlikely severe beyond design basis event. Emergency mitigating equipment has been procured and stored outside the protected area for use in case of a severe accident. Public alerting sirens are installed and tested around the site. Excuse me. Just need a Kleenex. Pardon me. Exercise Unified Response, conducted in 2014, demonstrated a number of best practices and identified opportunities for improvement which are being incorporated in current plans, procedures, and training. OPG is working with stakeholders to pre-distribute potassium iodide tablets to all residents, businesses, and institutions within 10 kilometers of the Darlington site and pre-stock potassium iodide tablets out to the 50-kilometer radius by the end of 2015. OPG is working towards full implementation of the recently published CNSC Reg Doc 210.1 on nuclear emergency preparedness by 2018. With regards to nuclear waste management, all low and intermediate level waste from Darlington is safely transported to the Western Waste Management Facility for storage. Some of the low-level waste may undergo processing, either through compaction or incineration prior to storage. Used nuclear fuel is first stored in the irradiated fuel bays at Darlington. After a cooling period of at least 10 years, the used fuel is then transferred to dry storage containers and moved to dedicated buildings at the Darlington Waste Management Facility located next to the station. The Darlington Waste Management Facility is licensed separately under a CNSC Waste Facility Operating License. OPG has implemented waste reduction and diversion programs at Darlington. Waste generated in nuclear areas, but that is likely not contaminated, is segregated and later surveyed. If the waste is found to be clean or non-radioactive, the material can be unconditionally released for conventional disposal or recycling. CNSC staff verify OPG's waste management programs as part of the regular oversight of the Darlington station. With respect to the Fukushima Action Items, or FAIs, OPG is the first nuclear power plant licensee to have closed all FAIs. Emergency mitigating equipment, or EME, including portable diesel pumps and diesel generator and portable uninterruptible power supplies, are available to supply essential fuel cooling through multiple paths and to supply key monitoring equipment in the highly unlikely event of a severe beyond design basis accident. Further enhancements are being made to streamline and simplify EME deployment and provide additional capacity to repower key station equipment. Hydrogen mitigating passive autocatalytic recombiners, or PARs, have been installed on all units, and emergency preparedness plans, procedures, training, and drills have been enhanced to include severe beyond design basis events. CNSC staff are satisfied that OPG has strengthened reactor defense in depth and enhanced its emergency response capabilities in response to the Fukushima event. With regards to the environment, the environmental assessment for the proposed refurbishment and continued operations of the Darlington station concluded that the proposed project is not likely to cause significant adverse environmental effects, taking into account mitigation measures identified in the EA screening report. OPG has since developed an EA follow-up program in consultation with CNSC staff, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and Environment Canada to ensure that it provides adequate controls for the protection of the environment and the public. EA mitigation and follow-up activities are included as commitments in the Integrated Implementation Plan. In addition, CNSC licensing requirements have been updated to include the CSA standards and CNSC Reg Doc pertaining to environmental protection, as noted on this slide. And for this specific licensing action, an environmental assessment under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act was carried out by CNSC staff and appended to CMD 15-H8. The report concludes that OPG continues to make adequate provision for the protection of the environment and the health of persons. In 2014, CNSC staff carried out an independent environmental monitoring program around the Darlington station. The results confirm that the public and the environment around the Darlington station are protected. These results are consistent with the results submitted by OPG, confirming that OPG's environmental protection program protects the health and safety of people and the environment. CNSC staff have also considered other matters of regulatory interest. Early in the review process, First Nations and Métis groups who may have an interest in the Darlington license renewal were identified, provided information about the process, encouraged to participate in the Commission's public hearing, and to apply for funding through the CNSC's Participant Funding Program. Since the EA refurbishment hearings in 2012, CNSC staff have met with identified groups upon request to discuss OPG's license application and the life extension process. CNSC staff will continue to actively communicate and build relationships with First Nation and Métis groups who expressed an interest in the Darlington station. Participant funding was made available to assist members of the public, Aboriginal groups, and other stakeholders to participate in the CNSC's regulatory process for this Darlington license renewal. A total of approximately $73,000 was awarded to 8 applicants. In terms of cost recovery and financial guarantees, OPG is in compliance with the CNSC cost recovery regulations and have satisfactory financial guarantees in place for decommissioning. OPG has a well-established public information program that meets CNSC requirements. Relevant information on the Darlington activities are being effectively communicated to the public, and CNSC staff have identified a number of best practices, such as public tours of the new Darlington Energy Complex. And finally, OPG continues to fulfill its obligations for nuclear liability insurance. Continuing with other regulatory matters, in June of 2015, Fisheries and Oceans Canada issued a Section 35(2) Fisheries Act authorization to OPG for the operation of the Darlington station arising from the continual intake of cooling water and the impingement and entrainment of fish from Lake Ontario. The authorization includes conditions to be complied with in relation to mitigation and offsetting measures and standards, monitoring, and reporting. The authorization is not linked to this CNSC license application and therefore does not impact or impede the decision for this license application. The CNSC staff are satisfied with the operation of the tritium removal facility located at the Darlington site. OPG is in the process of reviewing various options to extend the operating life of the tritium removal facility and expects to make a decision in 2017. Life extension of the tritium removal facility is being addressed separately from the Darlington refurbishment project. CNSC staff have completed all actions requested by the Commission as part of the 2013 decisions for the Darlington refurbishment and continued operations environmental assessment and 22-month license renewal. One such action was to update the Commission on the assessment and health and environmental consequences of severe accident scenarios at the Darlington site. CNSC staff completed a study entitled Study of Consequences of a Hypothetical Severe Nuclear Accident and Effectiveness of Mitigation Measures, the details of which were presented to the Commission in June 2014 and March 2015, and the final report will be published to the CNSC website in September 2015. I will now turn our attention to the proposed license and license condition handbook. As noted on this slide, CNSC staff are recommending a 10-year license to align with the recommended frequency for the conduct of periodic safety reviews as outlined in Reg Doc 233 entitled Periodic Safety Reviews. The ISR performed by OPG in accordance with RD 360 is considered to be equivalent to the first PSR. The proposed license includes standard license conditions that make reference to licensee programs. Specific CNSC regulatory documents and CSA standards have been moved from the license to the License Conditions Handbook. In addition to the standard license conditions for the 14 CNSC safety and control areas, the proposed license includes 4 new license conditions, as noted on this slide. 1, the conduct of a periodic safety review in support of OPG's next license application. 2, implementation of a return to service plan for refurbishment. 3, completion of the IIP activities. And 4, obtaining CNSC approval prior to the removal of regulatory hold points for the return to service of refurbished reactors. The Darlington License Condition Handbook, or LCH, provides compliance verification criteria used to verify compliance with the conditions in the license, and also includes non-mandatory recommendations and guidance on enhancing the effectiveness of the safety and control measures. As shown on this slide, there are 9 updated CNSC regulatory documents that are being proposed as updated requirements for the next licensing period. The implementation dates listed have been accepted by CNSC staff. And as you can see from the table, many of the updated regulatory documents will be fully implemented by OPG when the proposed license and license conditions handbook come into effect on January 1st, 2016. In addition to the CNSC regulatory documents, there are 11 updated CSA standards being proposed for inclusion in the License Conditions Handbook. And again, the implementation dates listed here have been accepted by CNSC staff. As you can see from the table, many of the updated CSA standards will be fully implemented by OPG when the proposed license and LCH come into effect on January 1st, 2016. I will now pass the presentation over to Mr. Barclay Howden for CNSC staff's overall conclusions and recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Based on the assessment of OPG's safety performance at Darlington, CNSC staff conclude that as per Section 24.4 of the Nuclear Safety Control Act, that OPG is qualified to carry out the activities authorized by the license, and in carrying out the license activities, OPG has made and will continue to make adequate provision for the protection of the environment, the health and safety of persons, and the maintenance of national security, and measures required to implement international obligations to which Canada has agreed. CNSC staff recommend that the Commission accept CNSC staff conclusions and recommendations presented in the CMD 15-H8 and exercise its authorities under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act to renew their license to authorize OPG to refurbish and continue to operate the Darlington Nuclear Generating Station from January 1st, 2016 to December 31st, 2025. CNSC staff also recommend that the Commission authorize the delegation of authority as indicated in 2 proposed license conditions, including the removal of regulatory hold points. Finally, CNSC staff recommend that the Commission authorize OPG to operate the Darlington Nuclear Generating Station beyond 210,000 equivalent full power hours up to the proposed refurbishment outages to a maximum of 235,000 equivalent full power hours. Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Commission. We are prepared to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you.